Welcome back, everybody. My name is Michael Clark. I am the Accessibility Specialist at the University of Waterloo, and I will be facilitating the remaining sessions for this, the last day of the symposium. Up next, I am happy to introduce from McMaster University, Anna Flak, Katie Harding, Katie Merriman, Matt Fesnak, and Nancy Waite with their panel conversation From Concept to Creation, Developing an Open Access Resource for Accessible Library Teaching. Over to you.
Alrighty, thank you, Michael. So as mentioned, that is the title of our talk, From Concept to Creation, Developing an Open Access Resource for Accessible Library Teaching. Katie H., could I get you to go to the next slide? We just wanted to get today started with a land acknowledgement. McMaster University is located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. Many urban indigenous folk also continue to inhabit Hamilton and its surrounding areas. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. As we reflect on our presence here, both as guests and uninvited settlers, we recognize that accessibility is a key component of justice and inclusion for all communities, including Indigenous peoples and those belonging to our institutions. All right, so we'll just start our introductions alphabetically. I will pass it off to Matt first.
Hi, I'm Matt Fesnak. I work as a LSP and Discovery Services librarian, just like a systems librarian. I have blonde hair, pink glasses, fair skin, and a teal shirt.
Alrighty, thank you. My name's Anna. I am a teaching and learning librarian in the social sciences and humanities here at McMaster. I am a white woman with brown hair, glasses, and I am wearing a red and white shirt.
Hi, everyone. My name's Katie Harding. I am a teaching and learning librarian supporting OER and STEM at McMaster. I am a white woman with blonde hair and glasses wearing a brown and white striped t-shirt. Happy to be here with you all.
And hi, everyone. I'm Katie Merriman. I am also a teaching and learning librarian focusing on STEM. I am a white woman with red hair wearing a printed dress.
Hi, my name's Nancy Waite. I'm the coordinator for Library Accessibility Services. I'm a white woman with blonde hair, wear glasses. I'm wearing a psychedelic 70s retro shirt with brown and gray colors and a brown cardigan. Thank you for joining us.
Alrighty, so a quick overview for today. We're going to start by just kind of discussing the project itself. We'll have brief presentations offered by a few of our chapter authors. We have some prepared questions for our panelists that we will go through, and then we will open it up to a bit of a Q&A for any questions that may arise from the audience. All right, so getting started. The background that sort of led to the initiation of this resource, Katie H. and myself participated in McMaster's inaugural Accessible Education Fellows Program in the academic 2023 to 2024 year. We are interested in pursuing sort of a topic in accessibility in libraries, and took the route of focusing on making sort of libraries or making screenshots and live demos more accessible in library instruction, as this was something we encountered quite frequently in our day-to-day responsibilities. Throughout this process, we weren't able to find much information about sort of library-specific ways of teaching and engaging with students. As we all might recognize, there are some differences between sort of the library situation we work in compared to, let's say, more typical instructors and so on. So after pursuing this fellowship for a year, we proposed a library strategic initiative for accessible library teaching. So we wanted to sort of take what we started and expand it to further cover a broader range of topics. So our hope in doing this was to provide an opportunity for team members to sort of take a deep dive into an accessibility topic, that they may or may not have been familiar with prior to getting started. We also wanted to create a resource that could be used both within our library to make library teaching practices more accessible and shared out sort of more openly with library workers at other institutions.
Okay, so getting started with this project, we did a bit of an environmental scan for information about accessibility and library teaching and learning practices. We put out a call for collaborators from within the McMaster University Libraries. This was open to anyone who was interested, and previous work with accessibility was not required. We created some chapter guidelines, which we will tell you more about in a minute, as well as a project timeline to help keep us on track. And finally, we shared examples of open resources about accessibility to help our authors understand our plans for the final resource that we hoped to create. So on this slide, we've got a list of some of our different team members. So our project included 13 people from different departments in McMaster University Libraries. We had a lot of representation from our teaching and learning team and from the Health Sciences Library. But we also had folks from distinctive legacy and digital heritage collections, from digital scholarship services, and from library accessibility services. Okay, so we provided a simple chapter template that included different sections and a description of what we hoped would be included in each of these sections. So we hoped that a chapter would have an overview, which was really just a short one-paragraph description of the chapter, a description of the library teaching practice, which would describe what is the teaching practice and what are some of the ways that common approaches might present barriers or be inaccessible. There's a section for guiding principles, which includes any guiding principles or frameworks informing the recommendations provided in the chapter. The bulk of the content would go into the recommendations for accessibility, providing recommendations for how to make the teaching practice and learning experience accessible to a wide range of learners with different needs and preferences. And then we had space for references and for further reading and resources that readers might consult to learn more. So we asked our authors to aim for a chapter that would be more practical than scholarly. We wanted this to be a resource that our colleagues would be able to choose a chapter, read it, and quickly learn a bit about how to make their teaching practices more accessible. And we were also pretty flexible with this chapter template, so authors could modify it to make it work for them. They didn't have to stick to these sections exactly as we had planned them. Okay. So we worked with our authors to determine which chapter topics would be included. We wanted for the authors to be able to choose something that would be relevant to their work. We didn't want to assign chapters to them. And the 8 chapter topics that we landed on were online and in-person instruction, instructional workshops, accessible technology and teaching, research consultations, LibGuides, online learning objects, access services, and outreach events. So in terms of our writing and revising process, we held regular, optional group meetings for discussion, questions, and scheduled work time to help us all keep on track. We had a peer review process once the chapter drafts were written, so that each chapter was reviewed by 2 peer reviewers. And those peer reviewers included authors from this project, but we also had additional reviewers from the McMaster University Libraries, from the McMaster's Accessibility Community of Practice, and from the McMaster Student and Alumni Accessibility Council. And so the authors revised their chapters based on the peer review feedback that they received, and then we also completed some editorial review of all the chapters. And the result is we published all 8 chapters in Pressbooks. The book is licensed CC BY to encourage sharing and reuse, so other libraries can use this resource, but they can also adapt it and improve upon it, and we hope that they will. And the book is now available online, so we can share the link in the chat. And the image on this slide is the cover of our book with the title Accessible Library Teaching over a very McMaster branded maroon background with an arc of a gold circle. We just published this a couple of days ago. Anna really wanted for us to publish it live during this session, but that was a little bit too stressful for me personally. Okay, so now we're going to hear some presentations from 3 of our chapter authors, and we will start with Nancy.
Thank you. So my chapter is titled Integrating Accessible Teaching into, or Accessible Technology into Teaching. Next slide, please. So the chapter explores assistive technology, or AT, that instructors are most likely to encounter in the classroom. There's 2 main themes in this chapter. The first focuses on student-specific technology, and the second highlights class-wide tools that can benefit all learners. Throughout the chapter, best practices are shared to help ensure students are supported in their learning environments. In the next few slides, I'll share some highlights of what you can find in the book chapter. Next slide, please. So when it comes to choosing the technology for your classroom, your best resource is your students. They're the ones using the tools, and they're the real subject matter experts. Ask them what works for them and what doesn't. Now, if you're choosing technology that isn't tied to a specific student, maybe something for the whole class, it's a good idea to check the product's VPAT. That stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, which Carly and Rebecca gave us some great information about in the last session. So a VPAT provides an indication of a product's accessibility, but it isn't perfect. One issue that many VPATs have are that they're completed by the company that made the product. So if a third party produces the VPAT and it's less than a year old, any older version is likely out of date with product updates. In this case, you can learn a fair amount about the product's accessibility features or where it may fall short. And finally, I still say go back to where you started with the students. Have the students test out the product. Let them try it out in the context of what you need it to do. Their feedback is the best way to determine if it will really work for your class and any issues that may arise. Next slide, please. So the next topic is student-specific technology. The first topic that we're going to talk about is screen readers. Some of the most common screen readers include JAWS, VoiceOver, and NVDA. To best support students who use screen readers, I recommend providing accessible Word documents wherever possible. While it's true that screen readers can read PDFs, in my experience, PDFs are often introduce too many issues, whereas Word documents are typically more reliable and easier to navigate with assistive technology, especially if proper heading styles and structure are used. Next is assistive listening systems, or ALS. These are wireless systems built right into many lecture halls and auditoriums. As an instructor, your role is to ensure you're broadcasting on the correct audio channels so that students can receive the sound clearly through their assistive listening device. To achieve the best results, always ensure that both the instructor and students, as well as guests, use the provided audio equipment, typically a microphone, and that it's positioned correctly to minimize interference from items such as clothing or facial hair. Next slide, please. When it comes to mobility devices, it's important to start by checking in with a student about their seating preferences, and also to be mindful that mobility devices like wheelchairs or walkers are considered part of the person's personal space. Unless a student specifically asks you to help, never move their device. And finally, encourage students to sign up for campus facility alerts so they get notified if there are any planned or emergency closures that could affect their route or access. In terms of speech-to-text technology, things like Dragon Naturally Speaking or Microsoft Dictate are common software programs. Instructors typically don't need to provide direct support for these tools. However, when students first use speech-to-text software or a new device, the software may still be learning their voice patterns, resulting in errors in spelling, grammar, and punctuation. As the program trains, accuracy improves significantly. Next slide, please. Now let's turn to class-wide assistive technology. And one of the most impactful tools that you can use is closed captions. Captions are essential for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. They also support a wide range of learners and learning preferences. To put this into perspective, 70% of Gen Z prefer watching videos with captions. Under AODA and most other accessibility legislation, captions are required on all videos shown in class. And while automatic speech recognition, or ASR, which is what is used to create captions, has come a long way since I started working in accessibility, we still can't assume it gets everything right. Always double check your captions, fix any mistakes, or send the video to a third-party captioning service if needed. In addition to pre-recorded videos, live captions are also available. These are typically generated in real time by speech-to-text tools and edited by a human. They enhance lectures and live events. For proper functioning, audio must pass through the correct equipment requiring speakers and correctly positioned microphones. A stable internet connection is essential for live captioners to ensure real-time accuracy. Next slide, please. Continuing the conversation about class-wide assistive technology, our next topic is described video. Described video, or DV, is often provided as a specific accommodation. However, when the entire class watches a movie, it's more inclusive to show described video version to everyone, which is why it's included in the class-wide section. Due to cost, described video is generally created only when essential visual content is missing from the audio. If the film features what I call a talking head, which is pretty much what I'm doing here, it's just a picture of me talking, described video is usually unnecessary. However, when visuals are crucial for the understanding of the film, described video is essential for various students, particularly those who are blind or visually impaired, as well as students with visual processing disorders. There are two types of described video: standard, which adds short descriptions into natural pauses, and extended, where the film is paused for longer. And the final piece of technology is Learning Management System, or LMS. Instructors can't usually choose the institutional LMS, but we can control the content accessibility. 3 key points to highlight. First, use a built-in accessibility checker, as most LMS platforms offer it. Second, instead of attaching documents like PDFs or Word documents, create content directly into the LMS. It's usually in an HTML format, which is highly accessible if created correctly. And third, when formatting content, use actual headings instead of bold or italic font, as the structure aids in screen reader users' navigation. Now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Katie Merriman, who is going to talk about her book chapter.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay, so I wrote a chapter on accessible research consultations. Next slide, Katie. So I volunteered to write this chapter. Like research consults is one of the main services that teaching and learning librarians at McMaster provide. And it was something that I was never able to really find a lot of resources on in like a straightforward way in our context. So it was something that I was thinking about a lot. So when this came up, I was like, fabulous. Let's try my best to take this on. So the goal of this chapter is to examine the practice of research consultations and offer strategies for collaborating with students who require accessibility support. It provides recommendations for information professionals through the lens of universal design and universal design for learning, addressing each phase of the research consultation process, so that being scheduling, physical, virtual spaces, and then the actual consult itself. Next slide, please, Katie. So I want to start by addressing some of the major barriers that students might face when coming to a research consult. So these four major barriers that I kind of came up with were screens. And this is can be for both virtual or in-person consultations, but those with visual impairments may have difficulty interacting with screens, and this can pose challenges to sharing information with the learners. As like screens being the primary access point to most information sources now, this can be a challenge. And then there's inaccessible tools. So while Nancy went through a lot of really helpful tools that can make things more accessible, and many of the tools and databases aren't really fantastic when it comes to accessibility in general, especially research databases. There's been a lot of issues with trying to get those to be more accessible, and they're just in general also just not user-friendly in a lot of ways. This makes traditional research practices challenging to those with accessibility needs. Next is consult locations. So both in-person and virtual consultations could have potential challenges. Some students might benefit and prefer the structure and reduced distractions of an in-person consultation, while others may prefer virtual consultations for being able to be in the comfort of their own space and having their own tools and not having to travel. And the final barrier that I kind of came to was audio or volume concerns. So for those with hearing impairments, having live captioning or the ability to adjust the volume can be very beneficial. So those were the main barriers that I kind of came to when potentially, collaborating with a student on a research consultation. So we can move to the next slide if you don't mind, Katie. To think about that, I kind of split up the chapter in how do you prepare for a consult with these kinds of barriers in mind. And I have a few of these things that you can do to prepare on the slide. There's a few more that are in the actual chapter too, but for the sake of time and to make you all read the book. No, I'm just kidding. But for the sake of time mostly, I have a few listed here. So a few things you can do to prepare for a consult to help reduce some of the barriers. So how are students made aware of the consultation service? Is this something you're only talking about in like classes that you come and visit? Is it on the website? How is it that students are made aware? And then how are even students booking the consult? Is it through a form or some sort of like booking system? Is it a direct email? Being considerate of how do they actually come to you? How do they find a way to book the consult? And then some of the more logistical things like the form system itself, does it meet standards of accessibility? Are you using accessibility checker tools? Are you providing students with the options of in-person and/or virtual consultations? Consider offering both if possible. That way students can choose like based on their own preferences. So those are a few things that you can kind of consider for preparation. If we move to the next slide, Katie, there's some other things to consider for in-person preparation specifically. So I mean, some of the big ones are just like the space itself, right? So is there wheelchair or mobility aid accessibility? Is your office on the third floor and the elevator only works sometimes? Is it a large enough space? Can people with aid find their way into the space that you wish to have the consult? Are there any locked doors or unclear signage of how to get to the space? We might be very familiar with our library and forget that to those who are unfamiliar, it might seem like a maze or intimidating. So making sure it's a clear, findable space. Also, of course, having a strong Wi-Fi connection or outlets, maybe extra computer access if the student was unable to bring their own. These are all things that you might want to consider so that we can remove some of the potential barriers for our students. Next page, please, Katie. Next is virtual spaces. So virtual spaces are still very popular when we're doing research consultations. Many students still prefer it even after the pandemic. Um, so I think a lot of institutions use either Zoom or Teams for their virtual um, communications. By my research, it seemed that Zoom tends to be seen as the most accessible between Teams and Zoom. So maybe considering that, but also perhaps considering like if the student has a preference, maybe the student primarily uses Teams, so they're more comfortable with using Teams. So if possible, like at McMaster, we have both. So seeing what works best for the student. And ensure that the permissions are enabled for sharing, so that, no one's stressed out that they can't share their screen. If people are comfortable, recording meetings can be very helpful as well. It's often a lot of information to take in. So trying to be cognizant of that recording can make it more accessible. Sharing any transcripts and also having live transcripts or live captioning, pardon me, can be very beneficial as well. Next slide, please, Katie. Okay, so those are some things that you could think about and consider prior to the actual research consultation. Now I would like to move into discussing some recommendations for during the research consultation. So there's three main points that I think are important to consider when actually in with your student during the time. So that's audio support, visual support, and then content or communication. Um, so for audio support, again, we kind of mentioned this, but ensuring that you're able to provide live captions, slower speech, and try to have jargon-free language. For visual, consider, zooming in on text, and different screen visuals just to make sure they're in a more readable size. Using descriptive language, like pointing out, oh, clicking here, or showing it and describing exactly where and how you got to where you are. And changing the visual display of your computer is also something that's possible. There's different contrast modes that might suit people better. And then the final one is the content or communication. And I personally find that this one is one of the most helpful and possibly one of the easiest ways to help with accessibility concerns, which is just leading with kindness and patience and, you know, provide space for invisible disabilities. You don't know what someone's experiences are. And I think that I'm sure a lot of people in this conference probably are more, like a bit more cognizant of these things, but sometimes things that might come across as someone not listening, or maybe what might typically come across as rude or something like that, often uh, is just someone, having their own experiences. And if we lead with openness and kindness and patience to try to find the way to support them and, bolster their autonomy to have their own support needs met, it just will help the process go a lot easier and help create a comfortable environment for them to feel like they can come back and that the library is a safe space. Um, and then the last thing is just recording consults again. It's a lot to take in, and so if they can refer to the consult recording, it just makes the experience easier for them so they don't have to worry about frantically, taking notes or misremembering something. They can just go back and take a look. And I think that's the end of my slides. So I, oh, wait. Yes, that is the end of my slides. So I'm going to pass it over to Matthew.
Thanks, Katie. So my slides are about access services. Next slide, please. So for my chapter, I sort of examine different aspects of library services, including directing users to materials, supporting learning, guiding research, and providing opportunities for engagement. And this area is very broad, and accessibility of library services can be affected by many things. So this chapter tried to consider as many aspects as possible, but obviously I'm sure there's some things that are missing. The focus was providing guidelines from government libraries and also building on what's missing from those guidelines. I sort of took on this project as an opportunity to air my grievances that I've sort of accumulated over the years, and providing relevant references to go with that. Next slide. And so looking at this picture, it's from the ALA reference bulletin. I think it's from the 1920s, and we can sort of see how library services have been at the forefront of librarianship for over 100 years. And you can sort of see a librarian providing a book to a parent and their child, and then another picture of 4 people in suits around stacks looking at books. Next slide. So in my chapter, I sort of broke the materials up into different sections, and one of those is that affects access services is the attitude toward users. And a lot of libraries have sort of practices that are standard across the profession that sort of persist from historic practices and reflect biases that are in the profession, primarily like white upper class bias, and that's also pretty ableist. And the securitization in libraries, particularly urban libraries, creates a lot of issues for mentally ill, disabled, and/or neurodivergent users. Next slide. Oh, sorry, in the last slide, there was a picture from Microsoft cutouts of a man sort of groaning with headphones. This slide is about the built environment. And so here I have a picture of Robart's library covered in zombies. This is from the movie Resident Evil Afterlife, I believe. It's sort of like an example of a bad library environment. And then on the opposite side on the slide, I have pictures from McMaster's campus accessible technology space, which provides specific access needs to different people, and trying to accommodate many different library users. And so in this chapter, part of the chapter, sort of considering the ways that even being in compliance with legislation can also create other barriers, and that just meeting the bare minimum is often not enough. Next slide. And so another section is about library culture. And so this was sort of partially informed by Cynthia Bruce's presentation at Access 2023 in Halifax. And I sort of referenced that in my chapter. And she was talking about how accessibility programs are often focused specifically on students and ignore staff or faculty. And so libraries often focus on, or universities generally focus on students, and then the staff are sort of left to fight for accommodations. And we've sort of seen throughout this presentation the difficulty of getting those accommodations, and it also creates a negative power imbalance between staff and their work environment, especially given how precarious living situations are and how expensive everything is. No one's going to want to advocate for themselves. It's going to put their livelihood at risk. And also, sort of as was mentioned yesterday in the presentation on accommodations, that there was a brief period during the height of COVID mitigation efforts where accessibility needs were prioritized, and there's been a massive scaling back of work from home, hybrid events, and public health measures. And we can sort of see that in the rise of measles across Canada and the US. And in most workplaces I've been in, they're all sort of been like angry at working from home and like eager to get people back in the office. And so considering the accessibility needs of people, just in the terms of accommodations, sort of puts people in a situation where they're sort of fighting their workplace all the time. And this is something I've found in many of the places I've worked throughout the pandemic. Next slide. Yeah, okay, sorry, that's the end of my section. There's more in the chapter itself if you'd like to read.
Alrighty, well, big thank you to sort of a few of our authors for sharing this sneak peek of what to expect in their chapter. As you see, we sort of went for a varied approach, trying to consider all aspects of accessible library teaching. Now we're going to move forward into sort of a few prepared questions for our panelists. Katie, if you don't mind moving forward. All right, so our first question is, what previous experience did you have with accessibility work? I will pass this question off to Katie Merriman, Katie Harding, and then Nancy.
Thank you. Yeah, so I had very little experience with accessibility work. So I was definitely nervous about taking this on. But when reflecting, I feel like that's one of the biggest barriers when it comes to working on accessibility is that we, at least personally, but I think a lot of us here probably feel like you have to be an absolute expert to take something on. But I think that, and I think a lot of this has been said today, like, perfection is the enemy of progress, and taking the steps to try to do the work and then being willing and happy to continue to improve and make efforts to improve and continue to learn is what's really important. So I was really glad to be able to do this, and kind of really begin my journey in learning more about accessible teaching.
Okay, so for me, I've been in teaching focused roles in libraries for a while. So I've done a fair amount of professional development that was pretty specific to like teaching practices in a classroom, often focused more towards faculty than towards someone who is a librarian. Um, Last year, I participated in the Accessible Education Fellows program at Mac with Anna, and we were looking at how to make screenshots and live demos more accessible in our teaching. And that really led us to more research and getting into the literature in accessibility and libraries and in library teaching. And so that's really helped me feel a bit more comfortable exploring that literature and understanding what's already been done.
I think for me, first of all, I'm a person with a disability, but I've also worked as the coordinator for library accessibility services for about 12, 13 years now. So in this position, I work directly with students with disabilities. And then I work with instructors and, talking to instructors about how to improve their course materials, and, other staff members in the university. So I feel like this was something that I am very passionate about. So it was an easy project to jump right into and help out with. And then in addition to the work, those things, I'm also the co-chair of the accessibility community practice at McMaster and a number of other committees on and off campus. So I feel like just in the whole, accessibility is just a huge passion of mine. But I think Katie Merriman mentioned a really good point, is that you don't have to be, somebody with this level of experience to do this type of project.
Alrighty, thank you all. As you can see, we're very lucky to have had Nancy involved in this, but as Katie said, it's really kind of all about just taking that first step. Our next question is, why did you decide to participate in this project? And I will pass this off to Katie Merriman, Matt, and then Nancy.
Thanks, Anna. So I did, I guess, kind of allude to this at the beginning of my little presentation, but Research consult is one of the main focuses of my role, and it's one of my favorite. Like connecting with students is, I find like the most rewarding part of my job, and being able to work with them one-on-one is, you know, the best part to me. Um, so I had one experience working with a faculty member who was visually impaired, and it was, I really opened my eyes like when I was trying to, share a screen. I was like, this poses challenges that I've never faced before. And then when I tried to seek answers or support, there's like some information out there, but um, I guess what I was I didn't find what I was looking for. So then that's why when this opportunity came up, I was like, I know what I'm looking for. So maybe I can try to put something together as a stepping stone that then someone can take away with later and make it better. So that was the main reason why I wanted to work on this project was I felt like what I was looking for wasn't there. So this gave me an opportunity to try to make an effort towards supporting those in a similar situation to myself.
For myself, I joined this project specifically because of a negative experience at Robarts Library. When I was a student there, I was sort of very familiar with how to access Robarts and like go to my classes and stuff. And that was that was in 2014 to 2016. And then going there recently, I was invited for work and experienced a lot of accessibility barriers. And this was sort of after they completed their Robarts Commons project that they touted as like making Robarts more familiar and comfortable and like community oriented and student space like specific. And so accessing the building, they put in like security gates and had like checkpoints that weren't like clear that they were necessary. Like I didn't know ahead of time that I needed like ID cards and all these other things. And so I've worked as a like systems librarian. We do all these checks for like least amount of clicks and like least cognitive load to like accessing technology. And then so at Robarts Library, just sort of thinking about all the steps that I would normally take for like a website or something, applying that to like accessing the like office space that I was trying to get to as an outsider at this building. I just sort of was confronted with all the like bad practices that like we wouldn't want to do if we were just like buying like product from a tech vendor. And then also in their newer space, they put in these like cathedral seats that other people have sort of criticized and that they're not accessible at all. They're just sort of like wood stairs. They're like giant and bathrooms aren't accessible on every level of these stairs. So if you have like mobility issues or anything, you just like can't access this part of the building. And this is like a recent construction. And so just reflecting like everybody when they have a job that's customer facing does all these training modules, and like you get a new job, you do these government training modules, and then it doesn't really seem to connect with the lived environments that we work in libraries all the time. So that was sort of my inspiration, was to make those connections, I guess.
And Nancy, just before you start, we're into our last 7 minutes.
I will be quick. So I decided to participate because it was an opportunity to connect with others and talk about how important accessibility is, and that it's not an insurmountable hurdle that one needs to navigate alone. And anytime that I can help to advance accessibility, I'm really happy. And first and foremost, accessibility in my mind, especially when dealing with students, it's about communicating with students about their needs, similar to any service interaction.
Amazing. Thank you all. Okay, we'll pass it off to our last question, which is to tell us about your experience working on this project. This will go to Katie Harding, Matt, and Nancy.
Okay, I'll be quick. I wrote a chapter about accessibility and library outreach events with Anna and our colleague Ariel Stables Kennedy. And we learned a lot about that topic in the process of like compiling all of the information that's out there. So that was fantastic. I also learned a lot just from reading the work of my colleagues and all of their chapters. It was great to see how interested they all were and learning more about their topics and putting these chapters together. And it really it made the process of editing this for Anna and I really, really easy, which was great. That's all I'm going to say.
So for me, I guess I would just sort of mention the difficulty of like managing schedules. I think that's sort of like a challenge for any sort of library publishing. I just had a bunch of other projects that came up at the same time, and it was super stressful to work on this as well at the same time as those projects. But otherwise, as it is only like brief, it's meant to be brief, and I've sort of seen other press books where it's like not a lot of writing, but a lot of citations and sort of focusing on a lot of references that are useful. And so following that sort of example, the one that I read was about inclusive metadata, I think it was a press book. And so I had seen those before. And I think making these kind of publications is like a useful thing to do for people. And that's maybe or hopefully going to reach more audiences than just like academic writing. That was my experience.
I think for me, because it's such a passion, the writing just kind of flowed. So I found it pretty easy. I also felt that in my experience, we had a good amount of time. We had several months, if I recall correctly, to write, and then we had more time to revise. So I think because we were just writing, I found that easy. And then Anna and Katie did like the hard work of actually uploading it into Pressbooks. So I was quite grateful for their support and their leadership in the project.
Amazing. Thank you all. So at this point, we're going to sort of open it up to a broader Q&A. There is a couple questions already sort of in the Q&A section. The first of which is, could you elaborate on what is the McMaster Accessibility Education Fellowship? Katie, you ramble less than I do, so if you wanted to take this.
Sure, I'll try. So in 23-24, McMaster offered this Accessible Education Fellows program. It was the first time. And so I it was sort of well defined, but it was effectively for faculty and staff who were interested in exploring questions related to accessibility. And so we could join this program and explore an accessibility topic either research with participants or researching the literature or what have you. And we had support from our accessibility office and from other peers who were doing that kind of accessibility work. Yeah, I hope that there's more information on McMaster's website, which we could share as well.
Thank you, Katie. The next question, I believe, is for Nancy, where you mentioned described video, descriptive audio for videos. Have you encountered the term descriptive transcripts before?
No, that's a new one for me. I will look more into it. Thank you.
All righty. There is a question of curious if the OER includes fidget toys at all as an idea. For example, keeping a couple of fidget toys on your desk during research consults, or bringing some along for workshops. They can help people focus or ease anxiety. Even the default presence of fidget toys can convey an implicit understanding of different lived experiences, needs, and preferences, which is perhaps also what a lot of your suggestions are all about too, inclusion as the default. So I don't believe there is sort of mention of this. This ties into another question that sort of fell into the answered category as well, about if we were sort of like offering language around masking or air quality. So there are definitely a lot of areas that I think we miss and that sort of like naturally arise at opportunities like this. Or for example, we were hosting Willu last week and really noticing the benefit of fidget toys in that instance, which I think we had not previously sort of encountered, but this is our hope in sort of this resource remaining active and continuously developing, whether through our work or through adaptations, that these sort of missed points can be added in. I'm not sure if anyone else wanted to sort of toss something in there.
Okay. Well, I think we're pretty much perfectly on time. Thank you all so much for this presentation and this work. Congratulations on publication. I can't wait for the symposium to be done so I can dig into it and start reading it. And I fully anticipate recommending it to all of my colleagues. So thank you so very, very much.